if Trump follows up on his helpful comments at the NATO summit and says that the U.S. will, one way or another, provide a steady flow of arms to Ukraine, Putin may have to step back. To use his own terminology, Trump has cards to play. He's got a potentially winning hand. The trouble is he's stopped shy of using it.
At the NATO summit, it's over. President Trump left European soil with strong messages in his ears.
Almost every one of them said, thank God for the United States. Without the United States, they couldn't really have NATO. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. It will in the future because now they're paying much more money, but it wouldn't work. It was great. And I left here differently. I left here saying that these people really love their countries. It's not a ripoff. And we're here to help them protect their country.
Right, so now what about the Ukraine war? During the summit, the president was asked if Vladimir Putin's territorial ambitions went beyond Ukraine.
I mean, it's possible. I know one thing, he'd like to settle. He'd like to get out of this thing. It's a mess for him. He called the other day. He said, can I help you with Iran? I said, no, you can help me with Russia. No, I consider him a person that's, I think, been misguided. I'm very surprised, actually. I thought we would have had that settled.
So let's then welcome to the program Daniel Fried, a former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs and a former American ambassador to Poland. Welcome to you.
Good evening.
It's good to have you here, Ambassador. I mean, yesterday I spoke to General Philip Breedlove, who's a former Supreme Commander in Europe for, as it were, from the United States Air Force. He suggested to me that Putin may have pushed his luck with President Trump too far in stalling on any serious move towards a ceasefire in Ukraine. And he suggested that Trump's view on Putin may be hardening. Is that your view?
General Breedlove is always worth listening to, and I hope he's right in this case. But the trouble is we've seen this movie before. Putin stonewalls, Trump pushes Putin, but then Trump goes sideways. Trump has never crossed the line and actually put serious pressure on Russia since becoming president for the second time. And Putin is, I hate to say it, but Putin is acting rationally in stiffing Trump. Putin probably calculates that there's at least a decent chance that Trump will never push back against what Russia is doing. So since Putin knows the outlines of the deal that Trump has more or less put on the table, Putin is trying to see whether he has to accept this deal or can go for everything, which is his preferred option. So until Trump actually pushes back against Putin, which he could do, there are plausible scenarios for him doing so, and he has options. Until that time, then General Breedlove's assessment is going to remain the hopeful, optimistic rather than the reality.
Right. So clearly you are not at all convinced. I mean, earlier...
Not convinced. It still could end up well.
Yeah.
Right? But it's up to Trump, and Trump has not he's not crossed that line of decisive action. Right.
So don't read too much into what we heard yesterday or speculation upon it. Now, we heard today from Anthony Scaramucci, who, as we know, is a very well-known commentator, worked very briefly for President Trump, then he was out of the White House. He spoke about, effectively, Donald Trump being in the sway of Vladimir Putin. Do you share that view?
That's possible, and Scaramucci is not the only person to have suggested this, but I think that Trump is torn between wanting to do a kind of great power deal with Russia, which would mean sacrificing Ukraine for very bad reasons. But Trump is attracted by doing great power deals with strongmen, or whether Trump wants the win in Ukraine, which he could get. That is, if Trump works with the Europeans to put more economic pressure on Russia, which he could do, and if Trump follows up on his helpful comments at the NATO summit and says that the U.S. will, one way or another, provide a steady flow of arms to Ukraine, Putin may have to step back. To use his own terminology, Trump has cards to play. He's got a potentially winning hand. The trouble is he's stopped shy of using it. Scaramucci says it's because he's enthralled to Putin. I think that Trump still believes that you have to cajole Putin. You have to be nice to him. You have to attract him, or else you'll alienate him. But that is the wrong way to deal with the Russians. I think that Secretary of State Marco Rubio said if we put more sanctions on Russia, we'll drive them away from the talks. I don't think that's right, and I think that Senator Rubio would have disagreed. The way you get Russia to talk seriously is by putting pressure on them, not by yelling or waving your fist, but simply putting on the table and acting on with some pretty tough moves. That would help.
Something that President Trump has not done to this point. He did speak about at least the possibility of providing Ukraine with Patriot missiles, or more Patriot missiles. I wonder, might that be significant?
Well, Trump said several things at the NATO summit, which I welcome. I think that his description of Zelensky, his remarks about the Patriot missiles, his remarks about NATO, his remarks that he doesn't need Putin's help on Iran, he needs Putin's help on Russia, those are all good. The reason I'm not jumping to conclusions that we're at the point we need to be is that we've seen this before.
Yes.
Trump says things and then he backs away from action. If he crosses the line and actually squeezes Putin, works with the Europeans, British and French especially, I'll be the first to cheer. And Trump could do it. He could get the win. But he's got to decide he means it. Got to decide he wants this.
Yes. Again, my conversation with General Breedlove yesterday, he was of the view, and it was an important point that he made, that Russia, he argued, was losing the war in Ukraine. They could not maintain the intensity of assault that we've seen until now. Their war machine won't allow that to happen. It is the perfect moment to exert the kind of pressure you're talking about. Exactly
right. Look, Phil Breedlove is a shrewd guy. I would take his assessment very seriously. This is the moment to squeeze Russia. But Putin is now betting on Trump caving, and he's betting on the Europeans falling apart. And this is a rational bet, but we can prove Putin wrong, at which point Putin may well change his approach. But to get there, we have to prove him wrong in his arrogant assumption of Western disunity and Trump's weakness. And then we have to put the pressure on. At that point, the Russians may negotiate seriously. Yeah. So General Breedlove is spot on right. Yeah. This is the time to squeeze Russia. It's not the time to go back and forth. But Trump has been going back and forth. He said some good things this week. I welcome that. I'd like to see that followed up by action.
Well, I do share your thoughts on the NATO summit this week. I mean, there was a commitment to extra spending, which was no doubt a positive development, and certainly made Donald Trump happy, especially like being referred to as a kind of daddy figure by the Secretary General of NATO. But for the future, we also heard the Secretary General saying there would now be a process by which we would see American forces in Europe replaced by European forces as Europe steps up its defence game. It is important that I don't know, changing of the guard takes place in an orderly and well-timed manner. Do you think that's certain to happen?
Certain, no, but more likely, yes. This was the most positive Trump has been on NATO ever, as far as I can tell. He said that NATO is important. He said the defense of Europe is important. He said he was impressed by Europe's leaders. He recognized that Europe is indeed standing up and spending more on defense. We'll see how the 5%, well, the 3.5 plus 1.5% of GDP actually works out, because it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's a 2035 deadline. But still, this was a big deal. Trump was positive about NATO, and that's the best you could expect. The summit wasn't glorious, but it did the needful, and it was the best we could have achieved. I credit the I credit the Secretary General. I credit Whitaker, the U.S. ambassador to NATO. So this was a good deal. The Europeans do need to step up, particularly with land forces. The Americans should not pull out of NATO at all. And if we draw down the land forces that we've got, we should do so very carefully. And I would keep in all the U.S. land forces in the eastern part of NATO, because as long as the war in Ukraine is going on. This is no time to pull back. But in general, as Europe steps up, the Americans can step back a little bit in some areas. We'll always have to be there with air power enablers and as a basic backup force. But now you can see a more orderly way moving ahead. That's where Trump seems to be. And instead of a chaotic summit, it was a productive and positive summit. Again, I credit NATO's leaders, who all seem to understand how best to work with Trump.
Ambassador, really good to get your thoughts on the programme this afternoon. Thank you. That's Daniel Fried, the former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs and a former US Ambassador to Poland.